Hey there YouTube, this is going to be a somewhat belated response to Matt, Timey2Wimey, and a video he did concerning annoying Doctor Who characters. It's also going to consist of a sort of retrospective analysis of the last season of Doctor Who, my opinions on which have been widely advertised on Facebook and various other venues. Now I found this rather difficult, actually, not because that there's a dearth of annoying characters in Doctor Who. That's certainly not the case. There are lots of annoying characters in Doctor Who, and that's the problem I had. It was pinpointing specific characters that are annoying and why. So rather than going for specific characters, I'm going to focus on the types of characters that recur in Doctor Who, which I find annoying, and then give examples of them. Now, number one is the pseudo-intellectual or the anti-intellectual character. You find this cropping up again and again in Doctor Who. They're the characters who have certain capacities. They're brilliant scientists, biologists, chemists, mathematicians, or something to that effect, but there's something childish or petty or malevolent about them, something that's short-sighted or narrow-minded. It's the classic evil scientist or misguided scientist stereotype, and sometimes that works really well. It can be an excellent template for a villain in Doctor Who. But other times it just comes off as, it either comes off as lazy, or just plain annoying. There was that character, I can't remember his name, but there's the child genius in the Sontaran stratagem episodes of season 4, who is phenomenally capable, phenomenally intelligent, but has this misanthropic quality whereby he looks down upon the rest of humanity, and I must admit I find that a bit difficult to take. I find it difficult to take because the kind of analyses that his mind was capable of necessarily, it seems to me, results in a kind of breadth, if not of intelligence, then of scope, of imagination, and that seems to be what he was missing. The character was, he had an almost instinctual, savantish quality for creating technological doodads and that sort of thing. But for some bizarre reason, he also had this incredibly childish victim mentality and the superiority complex, which I didn't find terribly believable. And it's the implication of that kind of character I really hate. I really hate. You get them cropping up all the time in Marvel comics, and comic book films and that sort of thing. And that is that there's such a thing as someone who's too intelligent for their own good. And the thing is, it narrows the perception of what intelligence is. That's what bothers me as well. It doesn't take into account things like kinetic intelligence and various different forms of intelligence, and perpetuates this stereotype that people who demonstrate particular capacities, it's a very British thing. We don't like people who succeed for some bizarre reason. We don't like people who excel in any particular fashion. We tend to mistrust them culturally for some reason. We see it all the time in our celebrity culture and the tabloids that build them up and then knock them down again, build them up and then knock them down again. And the absolute glee with which the British public takes to these tales of disgrace, flocking around them like vultures. It is that kind of thing. It's not just Doctor Who that's guilty of this. And to be fair, Doctor Who often always presents the alternative as well, in the form of the Doctor, who is himself phenomenally intelligent, but has the breadth of imagination and scope to go with it. But what bothers me is the perpetuation of fear of intelligence or capacity that stereotype suggests. I dislike that intensely. and also the sort of promotion of a stereotype of normality, of cultural normality. And once again, I will say that Doctor Who often presents the alternative to that. It often demonstrates how people should want more, they should want better than what culture tells them to. So this is not something that is intense, it's just some specific characters tend to be guilty of it, and that bothers me a little bit. There was another one in the first season of Doctor Who, in the Dalek episode. Another character who was phenomenally capable or intelligent, but ended up doing some monstrously stupid and unimaginative things, and that bothers me. It bothers me primarily because I don't buy it. I don't buy that someone who is as capable as they are painted would be that short-sighted, for the most part. There are some, yeah, I can get it. For example, Davros. Davros is kind of this stereotype, but I understand Davros. I think Davros is believable, A, because there are precedents of him in actual history, that's why he's believable, and B, he has an ideology, he's a fanatic in the purest sense of the term. Davros is a metaphor. Davros and the Daleks are a metaphor for any ideology that states that it is absolutely true, fundamentally correct and universally applicable. Any kind of tribal exclusivism, it's Davros and the Daleks. They are the Nazis, they are the fundamentalist Christians, they are the BNP, they are radical Islam, they are any group that basically states our way is fundamentally correct and anything outside is worthy of destruction. And that's why that character works, and that's what these characters need. They need some rationale for their actions and their behaviour, and it's not something that's always provided. I don't buy it when it's just short-sightedness, when it's just stupidity, unfortunately. Now the next set of characters, I must admit they don't occur in Doctor Who very often. Doctor Who's very good at this by and large. The last season, the one that's just gone, actually had a lot of these characters in it, and it's one of the reasons why I disliked it so much. But it's villains that are painted, again, as phenomenally capable and intelligent, or as incredibly powerful, but seem to be undone by their own stupidity. The Daleks are the prime example of this. I love the Daleks. I think most episodes where there's a Dalek involved I get excited about. But it bothers me when the Daleks are painted as these ultimate killing machines, whereby even one of them can take down like a whole bunker full of professional armed guards or entire armies of Cybermen or whatever. When they skulk away, doing something that doesn't make much sense, like creating the Pigmen in the I think it was season 3, the Daleks in Manhattan episode. I didn't understand that at all. I didn't think the Pigmen thing made any sense whatsoever. Yeah, I get that the Daleks in that episode were weakened and all of that nonsense, but the Daleks despise difference, they despise other life forms, so why would they bother creating a new life form? It doesn't make much sense to me. And furthermore, again, that's an example of the Daleks being undone by their own short-sightedness, and I find that really difficult to take. It's the classic villain thing, you know, where they spend too long monologuing or prevaricating about something petty, and instead of doing what they should be doing, which is murdering the hero or whatever. Another classic episode would be the fish things in the Vampires in Venice. And really, it's not the creatures that are at fault here. It's the writer. The writer of that episode did the ultimate cop-out for me in science fiction by putting a baffling button on the Doomsday device that not only turned the Doomsday device off, it also reversed everything that it did. It's such laziness, and I just don't understand. I don't understand from the rationale of what these creatures were trying to do, which is basically drown Venice. I don't understand why the button would be there. The device, once activated, had done what it was supposed to do. There was no reason for it to be deactivated, and there was certainly no reason why the button would be where it was, and there's no reason why the button would reverse everything once it had been done. It was just lazy writing. And this is, I suppose you could put this in another category, if you like. This is lazily written characters, it's lazily written monsters or whatever that don't... it's where the writers create something that's so apocalyptic or so powerful or whatever that they can't think of an elegant way out of it. They write themselves into a corner, and I can feel them doing it. That's the annoying thing. The season finales generally are the big ones for this. The Master season finale at the end of season, was it 3? Or season 2? I can't remember. Season 3. Brilliant setup episodes. Really, really excellent setup episodes. I loved John Simmer's The Master. And then, because the writer couldn't, obviously had written themselves into a corner where they couldn't think of a way out, you get the big reset button. And it was done in the most blasé, throwaway manner. It was basically a magic answer. And that's what I really hate. I hate it in science fiction and fantasy generally. The answer where it's just a matter of waving the magic wand or the sonic screwdriver or whatever and fixing everything. The cop-out. That's what I really hate. Cop-out monsters, cop-out characters, cop-out villains. There are ways of writing this stuff, this kind of thing. I mean, science fiction and fantasy do certainly lend themselves to convenient writing, to deus ex machina, more so than other forms of literature. Because the scope is so vast, there are very few rules under which this kind of fiction operate. So it's very easy to come up with a cop-out answer, rather than something that's elegant and believable. That's the thing. You have to create verisimilitude, which is the simulation of reality. Or not something that's sort of scientifically accurate or anything like that. No. That's not the point. It's something that has the patina of believability. That's what you have to create in good science fiction and fantasy. Something that's consistent with the rules of the universe that have been set up, so that the reader doesn't feel that they're being shortchanged, or the viewer in this instance. And that's sometimes what you do get in Doctor Who episodes, the cop-out. And you usually get it, it's the same thing you get in Star Trek. You know, when they start spouting gobbledygook, like, oh, let's reroute power from the primary engines to the forward lasers or whatever. Bollocks. Utter bollocks. It's gobbledygook designed to give the impression that something meaningful is being done when it's not. It's the writer being lazy, or incompetent, basically, being unable to write themselves out of the situation they've created. And the finales of Doctor Who are very, very guilty of this by and large, because they tend to set up things that are too epic, situations that are so epic that there is no elegant way out. And the characters involved in that are the ones that bother me. And the Master is kind of a prime example of that at the end of season 3. I mean, the way the way they actually resurrected the Doctor and got him to defeat the Master was stupid. I mean, basically he tapped into the global network which the Master had created and used it to siphon sort of I don't know, some sort of metaphysic belief energy from the humans who are all sort of praying to him. That bothered me as well. It's a cop-out, and it demonstrates a certain incapacity on the writers, because the Master designed the fucking network. Okay, the Master is not only a Time Lord, so he would have been able to at least sense what the Doctor was doing. He would have anticipated it. He created the fucking network. He's not an idiot. And this is the problem I have. It's characters and villains who are promoted as being as intelligent as the Doctor, or as phenomenally intelligent in their own right, but which demonstrate a very convenient narrowness of perspective or scope, or a limited imagination, which ultimately results in their defeat or their demise. I find it fucking lazy, to be quite honest. I want a character, a villain, who is a proper challenge. Someone who is not defeated by their lunacy or their stupidity or their narrowness of scope or whatever. Someone who the Doctor has to genuinely think to overcome. There have been villains like that. It's just that they're very few and far between, sadly. And it's when those characteristics crop up and they stand in contrast to what we already know of the character. For me, the Master should be the Moriarty to Doctor Who. He should be as intelligent, as capable, as charming, but without the morals, without the restrictions. That's it. That's all he needs. He doesn't need anything else to be interesting. And I want him to be as capable, but he's just not. He's just not, because he demonstrates this narrative convenience whereby he is limited in his perspectives or his capacities, and that pisses me off, quite frankly. The third type of character is the big one for me. These are the most annoying characters in Doctor Who, I think. The most annoying characters. And they're the third wheels. They're the characters who tend to be boyfriends or girlfriends or relatives of the assistant, who are sort of tacked on at some point. And they're usually there only to provide comic relief. That's all they exist for. They tend to be idiots. They tend to be incompetent in particular ways, but who demonstrate a sort of scrappy, plucky courage or whatever. Mickey, Rory is the big one for me. Rory I fucking hated. I think he was the worst Doctor Who character ever. And not only because the writing for him was terrible, he was just Mickey. He was Mickey all over again. The actor was abysmal. Absolutely abysmal. I didn't believe him. I didn't believe the character. For one instant, I saw an actor reading their lines, and doing so in a manner that was trying to be deliberately sort of obtuse and a bit stupid and a bit funny. And it didn't work. It didn't work because you didn't need the extra level of comic relief. Matt Smith as the Doctor, and his banter, the way he turned lines, and Amy as the assistant, and the banter between them was funny enough. You didn't need the extra layer or level. And the fact that they tried to manufacture a sort of tragedy around Rory didn't work. It didn't work because I didn't care. He was just annoying to me, and when he finally died, although it was evident that he was coming back, I was like, oh, thank fuck for that. Does that mean that we'll get a few episodes without him? I hope so. It's those characters. The only other character who has been one of the third wheel characters, if you like, but has worked, is Captain Jack. I liked Captain Jack in the TARDIS. But all of the others I disliked intensely. I disliked them intensely because of their reactions to what they're being exposed to. Rory in particular. I mean, he suddenly is transported across time and space to Venice in the 17th century. And his reaction isn't, oh my god, my mind is blown. It's sort of like, oh, I'm a bit of a stupid, cheeky chappy, blah, 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 blah. I'm just going to make some obtuse comment. I didn't buy it. I didn't buy it at all. And this is the problem with these characters. They are unnecessary. I think the writers throw them in because they are afraid. I think it demonstrates a certain lack of confidence in what they're doing, so they need another human character in order to maintain an audience interest, or a vantage point from the perspective of the normal person, quote unquote. It's unnecessary. Nobody cares about these fucking characters. We want the Doctor and the assistant. That's what the assistant is there for. We don't need anything else. And it's a demonstrative of something I dislike in Doctor Who generally, which is the focus on the assistants, on the normal. Don't watch Doctor Who for that. I don't think anybody watches Doctor Who for that. I want monsters, time travel, other planets, other species, other worlds. I want surrealism and strangeness from Doctor Who. The Doctor is interesting enough. The fact of the situation is interesting enough. I don't want to know about the characters' fucking families. I suppose that's a fourth category in many respects. Assistant families. There have been only 2 characters from the assistants' families I've liked, and those were Wilfred from Donna's family in season 4, I think it was. And I liked Jackie Tyler as well. But they're it. I'm not interested. I really hated Martha Jones's family because they were unnecessary and they were poorly written. They were just there. The stereotypes, very, very much stereotypes, and I couldn't be bothered with them. I had no engagement with them. Wilfred I loved, but I thought they were going to do something more with him. In my mind, I had it that they were going to link Donna's family to the Dr. Donna phenomena. I had it in my mind that Wilfred was a Time Lord. That he'd been... There was a little throwaway line given by the woman who appeared on the television in the Christmas episode, the one who turned out to be a Time Lord, who I think was the Doctor's mother. That was certainly the implication, that he was related to her somehow. And she called him an old soldier, and the war had passed him by. I took that to be a reference to the Time War, and I thought it was going to turn out that Wilfred was like the Master in the episode where he was disguised as the Professor, where he couldn't remember what he was, and that he'd gone on to he'd been stationed on Earth during the Time War to protect it or whatever, and that he'd completely forgotten the Time War had passed him along, and he'd gone on to have a family, believing himself to be human. It would have made perfect sense. It would have tied into the whole Dr. Donna phenomena. It would have been a great way of bringing the Dr. Donna back without her mind exploding, etc. But they kind of dropped the ball for me. I would have liked that to be the case, but they didn't. And even so, Wilfred was a really fun character. I actually liked Wilfred a lot. But the others I can't be arsed with. I find them, again, to be distractions from the real stuff of Doctor Who. And I dislike this increasing trend, that this notion that the real stuff is the stuff about the assistants. No, don't care. Don't care about the assistants. The assistants are there just to further the plot. That's all they're there for. They're there to get into trouble or to help the Doctor occasionally. It's something I hated about... One of the things I hated about the last season, actually. The fact that in the second episode, where Amy hadn't even been time travelling at all, she hadn't been to other worlds or whatever, she can outthink the Doctor. And my entire reaction to that was, fuck off. No. the first thing she should be doing is doing what Rose did, actually, in the second episode of the original series, where she was in awe for the most part. She was suspended in a state of awe, which is real. I like that. That's the way Amy should have been. Instead, she was entirely capable and sort of sarcastic from the beginning. And that gave me the impression of a pantomime, of something that is knowingly theatrical. And it didn't work for me. Didn't work for me at all. So yeah, those are the types of characters I dislike. I'm going to go on to an examination of the last season of Doctor Who now, and my opinions are kind of well known on the new season of Doctor Who. I disliked it intensely, for a variety of reasons. I definitely think that it was the weakest season of Doctor Who since it was resurrected. What I liked about it were primarily, the thing that kept me watching was the new Doctor. I think Matt Smith is a phenomenal actor. I mean, truly phenomenal. He's very capable. He engaged me from the instant he appeared. David Tennant didn't do that. I had to get used to David Tennant. I had to get used to Christopher Eccleston. It took a couple of episodes at least before I really got where they were going. Matt Smith, instantly, I just loved him. I think his physicality, the way he's all sort of arms and legs all over the place, but has this kind of shambolic elegance where he gets where he needs to be, I think is wonderful. And he's also very good at portraying a character who seems older than he looks. An old character in a young skin. He portrays that very, very well. Also, his ability to turn lines, to make mediocre lines and make them funny or make them profound, is fantastic. I think the man is absolutely wonderful, and I watched every episode of this season, even though I didn't enjoy most of them, primarily because I wanted to see what that man would do. I am really enamoured of the new Doctor. And he's fast becoming my favourite. He is fast becoming my favourite. What I wished was that the scripts and the direction lived up to his performance, because the scripts for this season have been atrocious. Almost universally atrocious. I can feel the writing in these scripts. I can feel the writer scrabbling around trying to accommodate some idea, or trying to write themselves out of whatever situation they've set up. Hence the Vampires in Venice narrative convenience flipping the button thing. There were the Vampires in Venice episode I will focus on, actually, because it is a primary example of what I'm talking about. Vampires in Venice broke its own rules multiple times, and that is something about this season that's pissed me off, I must admit, that I really disliked. Broken rules throughout, of not only the internal rules of episodes, but of the Whoniverse. The Vampires in Venice episode, yeah, we have fish aliens who are apparently allergic to sunlight in the manner of vampires, yet we fucking see the vampires in full sunlight multiple times. We see them in full sunlight when the sisters, the sort of references to the Brides of Dracula, are floating outside the window of where the Doctor and his companions are holed up. They're in full sunlight and it does nothing to them. We see them walking in full sunlight earlier on. And yet, later on, because it's convenient, a little ray reflected from Amy's vanity mirror turns one to dust, makes it explode. It was ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. It didn't work. It just did not work. Combined with the crappy ending, which was a matter of flicking a very bizarrely placed switch and reversing everything. It's what I will refer to from now on as the big reset button. I fucking hate the big reset button. I hate it in any narrative fiction, any narrative form. There are very, very very rare occasions where the big reset works. It's very rare. I think The Dark Tower, Stephen King's The Dark Tower, that kind of has a big reset at the end, but it is something that works. It fits with it's very well written. It fits with the ethos and the mythology of the piece. Big reset here is just an excuse for laziness. It's the same way that the Marvel comics do it all the time, and it's the reason I stopped reading them, basically. Marvel comics have this habit of compounding and compounding and compounding their storylines to the point where they become so elaborate they're unsustainable. So what they usually do is introduce some kind of apocalypse, something that's really big and epic, as an excuse of bringing everything back to the way it was. And you know when they're doing this because there will be a spate of resurrections. Characters that were dead and were properly dead coming back. You will usually find they weren't dead anyway, or some throwaway reference to them having an advanced healing factor, or oh, it's a clone, or oh, it's a robot, or oh, it's that character from another dimension. The big one for me was the end of the Clone Wars in Spider-Man, the Clone Saga. The Clone Saga, in stark contrast to popular opinion, I think was really well written up till the end. The end went all conservative and attempted to undo everything that had been done in the prior storyline. And as a result, it came off as, and also it was used by Marvel as an excuse to hit that big reset button where all of the dead characters came back and the status quo was restored, and then they could just get on with making happy chappy little Spider-Man stories. That's when I stopped reading the Spider-Man comics, because I think it's lazy. I think it does a massive disservice to the characters, because it demonstrates that there is no consequence in this universe. There's no lasting consequence anyway. Nobody stays entirely dead. Things don't stay entirely tragic. There's always a way out, and it bothers me. I don't like that at all. It's narrative convenience. It's like saying, it's like in movies or in television when you get the excuse, oh, it was all a dream. I cannot tell you from a writer's perspective how distasteful that is. It absolves the audience of any responsibility for the story. If it's all a dream, it doesn't matter. It's utterly ridiculous and so fucking lazy. It just doesn't work. And and this season for me has been guilty of a lot of that in terms of the writing. I know, not that I don't think that didn't happen under the Russell T Davies era. It did. It happened a lot. Again, particularly in the season finales. But one thing I will say is that even in the poor episodes under the Russell T Davies era, there was always something. There was always something that kept me engaged. There was an interesting character, an interesting performance, an interesting monster. Something going on that was intriguing. Not so in this season. I found episodes that were predictable and lamentable entirely, barring Matt Smith's performance. I didn't mind the first episode. I thought the first episode was actually quite good. The monster was tacked on. It wasn't there for any reason. It was just there to provide a bit of jeopardy, and so you could introduce the new characters, which is fine. It's what you kind of expect from an opening episode, particularly one where you're introducing a new doctor and a new assistant and whatnot. Fine, no problem. The second episode was a classic example of a writer playing around with too many ideas and not focusing on any particular one. You had these monsters, the sort, I can't even remember what they were called, the puppet things, whose heads twisted round to demonstrate whether they were pleased or not. That weren't there for any reason. There was no reason for those creatures to be there other than to provide the sort of standard Doctor Who monster. Another example of those would have been the Scarecrows in the Family of Blood episodes. I liked the Family of Blood episodes for a number of reasons, but the Scarecrows were incongruous. It was a classic example of them needing a mass monster, and someone saying, oh, Scarecrows are scary, oh yeah, let's put Scarecrows in there. This is exactly the same thing. There was no reason for them to exist in that society. And then you had the whole notion of a society functioning under the delusion of democracy, which is kind of cool. It's a nice idea, but not followed through enough, not explored enough, not focused on enough. And then there was the space whale thing, which I just found devouring my own arm up to the elbow sickening. I just found it a cop-out. I found it just poorly explained, and the way it was exposed through Amy, who apparently is more perceptive in this instance than the Doctor, a character who has only just met the Doctor, who's only started to discover that there are things like aliens and time travel, this is the first time she has time travelled. She has found herself in an entirely alien environment, that she's encountered alien species, and suddenly she is more perceptive and knowledgeable of them than the Doctor. Fuck right off. It didn't ring true for me. And I also didn't like the space whale itself. I thought the concept of the space whale was disgustingly moral and saccharine. It just fell completely flat for me, and that's when I started to have my doubts about this season. Really, I mean, to be fair, I had a few worries because I think Stephen Moffat does some brilliant individual episodes. In fact, I'd say under Russell T Davies, his episodes were the best, barring perhaps Mark Gatiss's. But for some reason, all of the TV projects I've seen where he's had authority have been terrible. Absolutely diabolical. And that's one of the fears I had, and it was something that was fulfilled by this season of Doctor Who, I must admit. Episode 3, the Dalek episode, that should have been a fucking gift of an episode. That should have been an absolute gift of an episode. And it was dreadful. Absolutely dreadful. The World War II scenario was contrived and incidental. That story could have been set anywhere, any time period. The sets were poorly shot, and this again is something that has been consistent throughout this season. The direction and the cinematography has been abysmal. Not only of the CG monsters, which have been very poorly shot, they have been shot in such a manner that they look like CG monsters. They look like they're superimposed over the live action. But the sets have been appalling in this season. They look to me like they have looked like pantomime sets. They've been too clean. They've been too sort of shambolic. It's fun. I mean, it has been something that has worked for Doctor Who in the past. There is a way of shooting these things that makes them look laudable. But this season didn't manage it. It didn't manage it at all. And the World War II episode is a prime example of that. Added into that, you have an excuse to have the Doctor and Winston Churchill together and to have camo-coloured Daleks. And although I like the actor who played Winston Churchill generally, I think his portrayal of Winston Churchill was dreadful. Utterly, utterly dreadful. And this episode should have been a gift. You have the Daleks, you have World War II. It should have worked. It should have been phenomenal. I mean, the Daleks are themselves obviously derived from World War II history. They are very much the Nazis. I mean, if you look at the genesis of the Daleks from the old Doctor Who's, the Khaleds, the species from which the Daleks are derived, are very, very much Nazi informed in terms of their uniforms and their imagery and their general ethos, and it fits beautifully. But it wasn't referenced. It wasn't played upon at all. And that I found absolutely appalling. And again, once again, we have in this episode an example of narrative convenience. Again, the writer didn't know how to get out of the situation, so let's just have magic Spitfires. We'll talk about, oh, this professor invented this, and we can just attach them to Spitfires within the space of a couple of scenes and have the Spitfires in space. No. No, 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 no. Again, I will say it's an example of the kind of narrative convenience you are going to get in this kind of series. And again, it's something that has occurred in Doctor Who before, but there's always been something. There's something laudable, and there should have been a lot laudable in this episode. The Daleks should have been phenomenal. They were phenomenally unthreatening. They were brainless, they were slow, they were stupid. There was nothing laudable about them. They were also Technicolor, which didn't help. I had very high hopes for the season finale of this one as well. I mean, there has been a kind of running story throughout. Not much of one, I must admit, just the cracks in time and a couple of throwaway references to something about Amy, which we've had before, by the way. It's a story that's being repeated. The silence, substitute the silence for the darkness, substitute the cracks for Bad Wolf, substitute Amy for Donna, and you've got the same story basically. We had exactly the same thing with Donna Noble. The Doctor being intrigued by her, the convenience of them meeting one another, something reaching back from the future, wrapping around her, blah 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 blah, leading up to a particular event where she would do this or that. It's exactly the same story. Didn't need to see it again. It's the same story arc, basically. It's just using different terminology. Saw it once, didn't need to see it again, and didn't need to see it done worse than it was before. The season finale, the setup episode was good. Again, it followed the pattern that all the finales do. Good setup episode, nice ideas. I kind of got that the Pandorica was going to be for the Doctor. I thought that there was going to be an alternate version of the Doctor inside, or perhaps another Time Lord or something like that. I like the notion of the Pandorica being a prison for the Doctor. I like the notion of his enemies conspiring to seal him in it. I like the notion of them trying to save the universe and all of that stuff. And then you get what they always bloody do, the writer having set up something too big, too apocalyptic, and not being able to get out of it. The opening of the follow-up episode, the actual final episode, just made me laugh with derision, because it was ridiculous. The notion of the Earth still existing with all of the stars in the universe gone, including the sun, and of history having taken a kind of similar path. Okay, there were differences, but it still conspired to produce Amy Pond. Fuck off. Fuck off. There are ways of writing this stuff to make it laudable, as I've said before. The universe, anyone who even has a paltry, a cursory understanding of cosmology knows that all of the stars within a galaxy interact with one another. That's how galaxies function. The gravity from one star impacts upon another and upon the bodies that orbit it. The Earth, without the other planets, without the sun, the Earth wouldn't survive. There would be no galaxy, there would be no gravity to hold it in place. It would fall apart, it would fly out into space. There certainly wouldn't be any life on it. It is utterly ridiculous. And okay, yeah, there is a certain inherent ridiculousness in Doctor Who. Fine, the TARDIS towing the Earth back into place, but there were reasons for that. There were at the very least little lines that were given that demonstrated how this could be so, and that's what you need. You need some kind of explanation that's consistent with the rules of the universe, of the series, that works. Every sun in the universe exploding and the Earth surviving, just fuck off. No. And then for history to progress in such a manner that Amy Pond was born. No. There was no good reason for that. It was absurd. Utterly absurd. And I couldn't buy it from that point on, really. I mean, River Song was in it, and I love River Song. River Song is a brilliant character. She's a gift of a character, and I like the Doctor, she is always brilliant. Always, even in the shit episode, she's brilliant. But I couldn't take it seriously from that point on. And then you've got the Pandorica. The Pandorica is set up throughout the season as this thing, as something to be feared, as a mythic object. And then you get the impression that it's a prison that can hold the Doctor. It's the ultimate prison. Only it's not, is it? Because a version of the Doctor turns up, hands one of his companions the sonic screwdriver, they point the sonic screwdriver at it, and it fucking opens. I mean, all of the Doctor's consistent villains are supposed to have designed this thing. Do you honestly think they wouldn't have taken that into consideration? Some version of the Doctor turning up to open it? I mean, again, it's an example of something that the writer had set up but couldn't write their way out of. It was utterly ridiculous. The focus of the episode should have been getting the Doctor out of the Pandorica. A better way they could have written it is if the Pandorica eradicated the Doctor's timeline, if it sealed him away from time so that his timeline didn't occur, so effectively the Doctor wasn't born. Then they could have portrayed a universe without the Doctor, without all the things he's done, where the Daleks are everywhere, where there are wars between Daleks and Cybermen, and all of the various species of the universe who are trying to take it over or whatever, a ruined Earth. And then you could have had those characters that are insulated against this effect, like River Song and the Rory Legionary or whoever, trying to free him. That should have been the focus of the episode, trying to free the Doctor. Instead, the Pandorica becomes this throwaway thing where you can just point the sonic screwdriver at it and it opens. No, I didn't like it. I think it was the laziest of the finales, and they're pretty lazy in general. The ways in which they're resolved are pretty lazy generally, but this was the laziest for me. Also, it didn't have what the finales need. It didn't have a villain, it didn't have a monster, it didn't have a nemesis or anything to work against. It was just like, there was lots of running about, lots of the writer thinking, oh, this is so clever, we'll have the Doctor coming from this time period to this time period and swapping between this and that. It wasn't clever, it was banal. It was utterly banal. I was hoping that the voice would make itself known at the very least. And okay, yes, we're going to get it in the next season, apparently. Too little, too late, really. If the quality of this season is anything to go by, then I'm not going to bother very much with the next season, to be perfectly honest. I found it generally to be... It dropped to the level of quality of Torchwood for me, where I watch it out of sort of morbid curiosity to see how bad it can get, and how self-congratulatory the people can get, the people behind it can get in the Doctor Who Confidentials. Yeah, I'm not impressed with this season of Doctor Who at all, but hopefully next season it will pick up.